Okay, this is the lecture for Chapter 9, which deals with structured interviewing. So we're going to continue on. Now that in the last chapter, we talked about sampling and the sort of proper way to get the people who are going to participate in your study. Next, we're going to get into data collection. How do we get data from these people that we can use to answer our research questions? And so one common method that's used in sociology, criminology, social work is to do a survey where you have what's called a structured interviewing schedule, which just basically means you have a list of set questions that you ask everybody in your sample. And it's the same set questions. It doesn't vary from person to person. And the answers that are available to the person participating in the survey are all set and fixed too. So you're just given a limited set of answers. That's sort of a multiple choice kind of situation, or something like that, where you don't give us the answers, you choose from a list of answers, that kind of thing. So you can think of it a little bit as being similar some ways to a multiple choice test. Okay, what is a structured interview? It's a useful tool for quantitative research. So this is used to go from answers from like information, words from people to numbers. Remember, quantification, operationalization of concepts we talked about before. Often used in social surveys. It's a standardized interview schedule, meaning that every question that I ask you, I ask the next person, and the next person, the next person. It's set for everybody. We don't just have a chat where we talk about whatever comes up or wherever the conversation goes. We have to ask every question and ask it in the exact same way, and the choices of answers that you receive are the same for every person who participates in the survey. So each interviewee, that's the person who's answering the questions. They also call these people respondents. They call them research participants. They'll call them research subjects. But they're saying interviewee here to focus on the fact that they're being interviewed, that a person is giving them questions that they then answer. They get the same questions, everybody, in the same way, in the same order. So it's very structured, rigid, but that's done standardized. That's done for an important reason that we'll talk about here in a moment. So what you have is you have closed, pre-coded, fixed choice questions, meaning it's going to be like a true-false type of question, a agree, disagree sort of question. So if somebody asks you, for example, are you in favor of the death penalty? They're not asking, give me your feelings, let's have a conversation and I'll record what you're saying. They say your choices are agree or disagree, favor the death penalty, oppose the death penalty. Now they may get a little more sophisticated than that, and they'll say, well, do you oppose or do you strongly oppose, or just oppose a little bit? But the answers are laid out beforehand, and you have to choose one of those answers. Now, sometimes the answers might be don't know, don't have an opinion, not sure, but they're still fixed, so you can't say whatever you want. You have to be put into a particular box. That's the way these work. They're very standardized and, to use a negative word, I suppose, kind of rigid that way. But a lot of the reason why it's done this way is to minimize variation between interviews. We don't want you to give certain answers because of how we do the interview, and somebody else gives different answers because we do the interview differently. We want it to be your honest, accurate truth, your information. We don't want that information to get distorted by us, by the researchers, by the interviewers. We're trying to get the truth. We're not trying to influence your answers. So that's why it's done in such a standardized way. Common sources of error in survey research. A poorly worded question. So if it's a vaguely written question, usually lack of precision is the problem with questions when it comes to this poorly worded. So if I say, an obvious example, if I'm a criminologist and I want to ask you a bunch of questions to find out if you've broken the law in the past, It wouldn't be, it would be a really bad question if I was to say, have you ever been bad in your life? Yes or no? Well, what do you mean by that? Hasn't everybody been bad in their lives? It's vague. I don't know what you're talking about. It's so broad that it's practically meaningless. And you're not going to get, you're always, with questions, you always want to give variety. You want to get people to answer different things, so you compare why some people have committed crimes and other people haven't committed crimes. So you compare the two groups of people. But if everybody says, yeah, I've been bad, then you don't have any good people to compare against, right? So, usually it's vagueness and imprecision that makes for bad questions, but we'll get into bad and good questions more later on. But the way also that the question is asked by the interviewer can create error. So if I ask you with a judgmental tone of voice, if we're doing a telephone interview, and I say, something like, listen, you're not one of these evil people who's ever beaten his wife before, are you? The way I've set up that question is going to, let's say that you have engaged in domestic violence. Well, you may not want to tell me. It may be the truth, but you may want to lie to me and tell me you never have been violent towards a spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend or something like that, because this interviewer is so judgmental that they're going to think I'm an awful person if I say yes, so they might lie. See, so you don't want to. That's another source of bias, is if you come across in a way where the respondent, the interviewee, gives an answer that you want as opposed to the truth, right? So this is another reason for uniform standard questioning. If I ask you the same way every time, like a robot, and everybody gets the same question in the same tone, well, then the answer should be equally valid, right? So the way the questions are answered needs to be uniform when you're doing these structured interviews. Of course, there can be a misunderstanding by the person who's answering the questions. If the questions are bad or the interviewer is not skilled and doesn't do a good job, misunderstanding leads to bad answers, to error, and of course, we've talked previously about it. It's all about accuracy. It's all about getting at the truth, hitting that bullseye. And if there's misunderstandings going on, you're going to get a poor answer. Also, of course, memory problems are common, especially if you're asking about things that happened in the past, a long time ago. And so someone may have forgotten they've done it, forgotten about something, and then so you get inaccurate information. So human memory is very flawed, very imperfect. And so it's a problem. It's an issue. It's better to ask what's going on right now as opposed to what's going on in the distant past. If you're asking about childhood and the person's a grown-up, well, you may not get the most accurate answers in the world that way. It's a limitation of studying the past. The way the information is recorded by the interviewer. So you give an answer, I record it. Well, what if I don't have very good rules about how to record your answer? Or if if the answer choices are bad, if I don't really give you an option as an answer that fits you, and basically you get put in the wrong box, your answer is sort of miscoded. That's inaccurate. That's an inaccuracy. It brings error into it. If I say, do you agree, disagree, and you're almost neutral, but you say, okay, I kind of agree with that a little bit, but you're so weak, and then somebody else is super passionate about it, and they agree just passionately with a great intensity, but the way you score it is that both of you agree, the same score. You both agree, you're both treated as equal. There's error there because one person's totally weak on the issue and the other one's super strong on the issue. So why do they get the same number? Why do they get the same score? See, so there can be the answer choices, if they're not chosen carefully, can lead to error in your data. The way that the information is processed, either when the answers are coded or when the data are entered into the computer. So let's say that the rule that I follow is I'm going to give you a 1. If you strongly disagree, I'm going to give you a 2. If you disagree, I'm going to give you a 3. If you're neutral, I'm going to give you a 4. If you agree, and 5 if you strongly agree. Okay, and that's the number that goes into the computer, into the spreadsheet, to symbolize, to represent your answer, but with a number, so we can do quantitative analysis on it. Remember, we're always reducing things down to a number. But if you say, oh, I agree with that, you should get a 4, right? Remember, based on the rules that we just set up about who gets what. But if I am sloppy and not entering the data carefully into Excel or some spreadsheet, and instead of giving you a 4, I give you a 40. Now it's a crazy number that doesn't make any sense. So you get errors from entering and processing the data with errors, with inaccuracy. Then you end up getting funny numbers that screws up your analysis. So see, there's problems, potential problems at just about every step here. So you have to be very careful. This is why a good researcher is extremely careful and thorough and just very detail oriented and very uptight about accuracy, because if you're not uptight about it, if you're really loose and relaxed, well, that kills good research because you end up getting inaccurate numbers. Now, advantages of structured interviewing is it reduces the error due to interviewer variability. So one thing we'll see about qualitative research, where you have a deep conversation with somebody for 2 hours or something, is that if I get interviewed by a really friendly person that I'm really comfortable with, they may get different answers out of me than somebody who's like really unfriendly and difficult, and I don't hit it off with them. So personality differences can lead me to give different answers. But even with a structured interview where the questions are all set up beforehand and are all rigid and fixed, that if the tone of the researcher, the tone of one person who says one person's really judgmental, I may give them somewhat different answers than somebody who seems to be very non-judgmental and very open, and they don't care what I say, good or bad, right? So this is why they try to make this structured and the same for one person to the next, to the next, to the next. They don't want you to give different answers depending on who is asking you the questions. They want you to give the same answers regardless. So that's how come they try to make it all very uniform. So difference in responses are due to true variation, not inconsistencies in the conduct of interviews. So we want people to give different answers because that's who they are, because people are different and there's diversity out there. You feel differently than this other guy over here, fine. We want to know the truth. That's the variation that we're after. But we don't want people giving different answers because we're misleading them, we're confusing them, we're pushing and pulling in them in different directions. We want the truth. Okay, that's what we're always after, accuracy that's coming from the person. Potential sources of error are reduced by standardization. So again, if you have the same questions with the same exact words, the same exact issues, well, then you should be able to reduce problems here. If you set up the question beforehand, so you say, okay, I might be tempted to ask about all the way 5 to 10 years ago, but 5-10 years ago, people probably forgot. So let's just keep it the past 6 months. You're going to avoid error that comes from the memory issue. And if you go over your questions very carefully, make sure they're super clear, black and white. You always want to go for being as concrete and black and white as you can. Then you can avoid misunderstandings and all of that. So if you're all very careful and setting things up correctly beforehand, and then you're standardized where everybody gets the same thing, you should be able to reduce error. Now, this next couple of terms here, they like to use these fancy terms. Reduces intra-interviewer and inter-interviewer variability. And all they mean by that is intra means within yourself. So me as the interviewer, I don't want, if I interviewed you 2 different times, it wouldn't be good if I was like in a good mood one time and then a bad mood the next time, and that it was like an open sort of interview where we didn't have all the structured questions and everything laid out. If it's just really open-ended, well, I might get a different set of answers out of you if I'm in a good mood one day versus a bad mood the next day. So we want to reduce that kind of thing. We want it to not matter what mood you're in that day as an interviewer, that it's so set up and structured, you're going to treat the person exactly the same today as you would tomorrow. So that's what they mean by intra-interviewer variability, that I might change from day to day to day and bias the data, bias the results because of my moods or how I might be different from one day to the next. That's intra. Inter-interviewer is me versus another person who's doing an interview, and I'm the nice guy, and so I get one set of answers, and they're mean, and so they get another set of answers from a person. We don't want that, and so that's why we have all the same questions, and everybody's trained to be professional and non-judgmental and neutral, and just give us the truth. We're after the truth. So if we all act in a uniform way and we don't let our personalities get involved too much, we just keep it professional, keep it serious, that will reduce this error that of one interviewer to another. That's what they mean by interviewer variability. Again, a mouthful, difficult stuff, but hey, that's what you get with research methods. And then if you do all of these things very carefully to reduce error, then you should hit the bullseye. You should get closer to the truth, which means greater validity, greater truth in the data. You're getting an accurate picture because the truth is coming from the person as opposed to bias, as opposed to influence. Their answer is getting influenced by these things that shouldn't matter, that shouldn't make any difference. Okay, let's stop right there.